Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so pleased that you have found us here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze at a special time of Crime Time. And we are honored, honored, honored to have with us today Bradeigh Godfrey, whose new book, Imposter, is out today, which we love hosting people on their launch days. Quickly, let me welcome you all. I see you all arriving. Thank you. I am Hank Phillippi Ryan, your host here at Crime Time, the USA Today bestselling author of 13 going on 14 novels of suspense. And we're so happy that you found us here today. Bradeigh Godfrey has a wonderful history and a wonderful bio and a wonderful story. And last night, you can see, look how banged up this book is from how deeply I read it. We were talking earlier about what makes a really good novel. And I was telling Bradeigh that it was a book that's more than just the story, a book that stays with you, a book that lingers with you, a book that is more than just a plot. And this is certainly that. I want to tell you it's about motherhood and sisters and secrets and how we pretend to be something that we're not on so many levels. And we all do that. And it's also fascinating about how our brains work and how our minds physiologically work, and things over which we have no control. And also the deeply devoted doctors who care for us, and some of whom might not be so. How difficult it is to be a mother, how difficult it is to be a wife, how difficult it is to be a sister, and how difficult it is just to know what to do sometimes. You know, we all think when we grow up, we'll know. And it still becomes very difficult. Renee is here saying welcome to Bradeigh. And Mary Garrett is saying characters you want to stay with afterward. And yes, that's absolutely true. I'm gonna stop talking. I'm gonna tell you what Lisa Unger says about Imposter. As slick and slippery as a dark, icy road, and that means something. Imposter has it all. Tense, immersive, and smart. This is a must read, Imposter. Bradeigh, what did you think when you saw that blurb from the fabulous Lisa Unger? And happy
Oh, yeah. I thank you so much. And thank you everyone for having me. I'm so grateful to be here. When I read that blurb, it was, one of those sort of like fainting moments where I just thought, that's amazing. When you send out requests to these amazing authors that you admire so much and ask them to read your book, and you don't really know if they're going to read it, right? And you don't know if they're going to have time. And so when they do, it's the best feeling as a new author.
It's great. And she's marvelous and she knows her stuff. And I understand that feeling. I see you all arriving. Sherry is asking, let's talk about this. Well, that's a great question, Sherry. What meaning does the cover have in the book? Let's talk about that in a minute, because I want to take 30 seconds to welcome you all to A Mighty Blaze. If you don't know about A Mighty Blaze, that's great. We're so happy that you are here today. It was started at the beginning of the pandemic by the fabulous powerhouse team of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us all discovering new books and talking about books and staying together in reader-writer world. And that is why we are here today. And let me tell you, first of all, that Bradeigh Godfrey is giving away a copy of Imposter to one of you lucky viewers. So just leave a question or a comment for Bradeigh as the show goes on, and we will spin the wheel of fun, as you know, at the end of the show and give this book to one lucky commenter. Let me tell you a little bit about our author for today, and then we'll let her talk. I have to do all of this housekeeping at the beginning of each Crime Time, but I want you to know what Mighty Blaze is, and I want you to know who our author is. And welcome, welcome, welcome to Bradeigh Godfrey, who is a physician, a mom of 4, and a writer. Her medical career is focused on caring for veterans with visible and invisible disabilities, and she is passionate about improving quality of life and wellness in veterans through research, teaching, and clinical work. Her debut novel, Imposter, is a psychological thriller exploring sisterhood, secrets, and the neuroscience of memory and trauma. And it is out from Blackstone today, and we love Blackstone. What a fantastic publisher this is. She's an avid reader and book reviewer and can be found on Instagram at Bradeigh Godfrey and sharing her latest reads there. Bradeigh also co-writes romantic women's fiction under the pen name Allie Bradeigh. So I want to talk with you today, Bradeigh, about sisters and motherhood and marriage and being a doctor and being a patient and being an imposter and all that entails. But first, tell us, I love to hear how the author describes their novels. And that way I don't give anything away. Tell us a little bit about Imposter.
Sure. So Imposter is about two sisters who have been estranged for several years. And the younger sister reaches out to the older one and asks if they can get together for dinner. And so as they are driving to dinner, it's a snowy night in Chicago, and the younger sister tells the older sister that she has something to tell her of life and death importance. But before she can do that, they are in a car crash. And the younger sister ends up severely injured in the ICU, unconscious with a traumatic brain injury. And the younger sister, or the older sister, has a concussion, but she remembers enough about the crash to think that someone was following them and that someone hit them on purpose. So she wants to find out who it was. Did it have something to do with this life and death matter that her sister was trying to tell her? And when her sister does begin to recover, her sister develops a rare neurologic condition that we can talk about a little later and makes communication even more difficult. So, and there's still someone trying to follow them around. So,
well, it's very sinister and quite mysterious. Darlene is saying, what? You're happy about it, Bradeigh? I'd love to be trapped. Yes, this is her secret identity. And we will talk about that, of course, Darlene, in a while. Where did this idea come from?
Let's see. So it's interesting because years ago, even when I was in like medical school and residency training, I used to sort of invent stories in my head, as writers do, but I didn't know I was going to become a writer at the time. But I had this idea of two women or two sisters getting in a car accident. One was going to tell someone a secret, and before she could do that, they're in a car accident. That was really all I had, but it just sort of lingered in my mind for a long time. But I didn't know what to do with it for a while. But then one day I learned about this really rare neurologic syndrome called Capgras syndrome that I mentioned earlier. And this is a syndrome in which the person affected, it can happen after a brain injury, a stroke, sometimes in dementia. The person affected believes that their closest loved ones have been replaced by identical looking imposters. And when I learned about this, I thought that has the makings of a psychological thriller. And so I sort of, as I thought about it, I started thinking about this idea that I had long ago about these two women in a car accident and sort of found a way to bring in the Capgras syndrome, and then just sort of spooled out from that.
Well, it's interesting because this book, not only about sisterhood and motherhood and marriage, but it's about communication and about how we deal with each other and what we tell each other and what we don't. And when someone has a brain injury, their method of communication is so impaired. So the outgoing information is impaired and the incoming information is impaired. Talk a little bit about why that's fascinating to you and why you decided to put that in a book.
So when I've taken care of patients who've had traumatic brain injuries, that has always been something very challenging to deal with patients, and also it's very difficult for the patient, and it's very devastating for their family members because oftentimes these patients are trying to communicate and they can't. And so this concept of trying to get your words out or trying to understand what someone else is telling you, it just has such emotional resonance. It's just rife for sort of digging through and focusing on as a writer.
And one of the wonderful things about writing a thriller is that often in a thriller, one of the conflicts arises because a character makes a mistake or misunderstands something or decides one thing when it's really wrong. And when you can't rely on someone to tell you something, or when someone's brain is not working and they are infinitely wrong, constantly wrong, always wrong, you're dealing with that juggle. What was it like to write the main character's reaction to this terrifying circumstance?
She was a really interesting character to write. Her name is Lillian. She's a pediatrician. She's been through a challenging situation with a patient that went badly, and she's also a new mom. And now she's just reconnected with her sister, and then this horrible accident happens to her sister. And so she has a lot of pressures sort of coming in at her, and she feels like she's sort of failing at all of them. And this injury that her sister has gone through and trying to uncover her sister's past so she can find out what she was trying to tell her becomes this sort of obsession to her. She wants to find out what's wrong with her sister. She's a doctor. She wants to figure out the problem and fix it. And so she really wants to try to find out everything that's going on. And that I could 100% relate to that. When you're a physician and when you care about a patient, and if you can't figure out the issue, it can be incredibly frustrating. And I just have had many times when I spent hours just pouring through medical journals and asking my colleagues, trying to figure out how do we take care of this patient.
It's interesting because when you talk about a doctor trying to fix it, or Lillian trying to fix the problem, and she has a history, she's haunted by a time that she got it wrong. And so she's sort of had the emotional rug pulled out from under her. And she's a little bit in disequilibrium anyway, because she's second guessing herself all the time, to the extent that she knows she may be a little over obsessed with trying to make everything right. Her whole life is trying to do everything right and make everything right. And she wonders whether she can still do that. And that imposter situation is so, permeates the book so much, because she's not quite sure who she is. She's not quite sure if she is actually a good doctor, if she's actually a good mother, if she's actually a good wife, if she's actually a good sister. Talk a little bit about how that feeling of being an imposter weaves through the story, and why that's important. I mean, it's not just the Capgras syndrome, not just the Capgras syndrome of that's the specific thing where the patient thinks someone is an imposter, but it's she herself feeling like an imposter in so many ways.
Yes, the sort of the double meaning of imposter in the title was really fascinating for me to explore. And honestly, I think many people that I know in medicine, a lot of women in medicine, a lot of people of color in medicine, feel like imposters. They sort of feel like they don't quite fit in. And are they good enough? Are they just faking it? You sort of are told when you're in medical school to fake it till you make it. And so you sort of feel like you're faking it for a long time. And it can last even into your years of practicing, sort of this feeling of like, sometimes you catch yourself wondering, wait, maybe I fooled all these people all this time. And so Lillian's going through that, and she had a bad outcome with a patient that's haunting her. And she's struggling to adjust to motherhood, and she's having anxiety related to that. And so exploring that it felt very personal to me. It's many things that I felt myself, and other women in medicine and other colleagues that I've talked to, many people have felt that.
I mean, I think it's interesting because anyone who's a mom has felt that. Anyone who's a person has felt that. And no matter what profession we are, we think, well, we're just fooling people. And at some point, I don't think I've ever talked to a writer who doesn't feel that way, that at some point readers and publishers are going to say, yeah, you're not really very good. I mean, I'm talking about super New York Times bestsellers feel this way. Why do you think that is such imposter syndrome is a fascinating subject in many platforms, in many professions, says Margaret in the back room. Yes. And I think this rings so true. Hi, Diane, rings so true for all of us, that are we just faking it till we make it? And why does it seem like such a female thing? And that's another thing you do in this novel, is the men don't feel that way, but the women do.
But the women do. Goodness, that's a very good question. I wish I knew all the answers for that. Many professions that we enter in as women were sort of designed by men, and we're sort of stepping into a sort of a situation that's been run by men for a very long time. Medicine certainly has, law, business, many professions. And so when you step in, you sort of automatically feel like you are a little bit of an outsider, and like you have to work extra hard to prove yourself. And I think I've noticed that it seems like there are absolutely people that I've run into in, in my work and other places who do not feel this way. So not everybody feels this way, but I feel like most women have felt it at some point in their lives.
Sure, at some point in their life. And I agree that people can evolve and grow out of it, certainly. And that's the goal for everyone. One of the things about Lillian, too, is that she's a new mom. And this is, having someone else's life in her hands, and she's not quite sure if she's a good mom. And she knows she's possibly overthinking. I mean, there's a wonderful scene where she describes watching her daughter sleep and counting the seconds between her breaths. I mean, that terrifying agony of fear. Talk about writing that a little bit and why that was important for you to include in this book.
Yes, thank you for asking that, because that was really important for me to include. When I had my children, I had not as severe as Lillian, but definitely had some issues with some anxiety postpartum. And I think it's very common, and I don't think we talk about it very often, because it can be sort of embarrassing to say, I'm so worried that my baby's going to stop breathing at night that I gasp out of bed and rush over to the bassinet and make sure that he or she is. And so I really wanted to make sure I portrayed that in Lillian in a way that would feel true to people who've experienced it and would also be respectful of people who've experienced it. And I think because she's a physician and a pediatrician specifically, there's an added layer of this. Many people who are in healthcare, we've seen the worst things happen. And so for her as a pediatrician, she's seen terrible things happen. So she knows they can, even if it's unlikely. And so she almost feels like she needs to be extra vigilant and extra careful to prove sort of that she's a good mom and a good doctor.
Especially since she made a mistake with a child and said that everything was fine when it wasn't. And I'll let you all read. We're talking about Imposter, which we highly recommend. It's absolutely a page turner, completely wonderful. So she's haunted by this mistake she made with a child in the past. And what if she does the same thing with her own daughter? And I can tell you that it's absolutely haunting, because we think as readers, we think, oh, come on, Lillian, it's going to be fine. And then you think, well, maybe it isn't, though, maybe it isn't. And you take us into her life so beautifully. And then in comes her sort of long lost sister, who she's been estranged from for years. And she thinks she knows why. She thinks she knows why. And finally, they're going to possibly reconcile when this cataclysmic accident happens. And she tries, as you said, she becomes obsessed with finding out whether someone was following them and why, and begins to dig into her sister's past. Talk a little bit about that and the idea of sisterhood and why that bond is so strong.
Yes. So that was really fun for me to write about. So the sisters are 10 years apart in age, and their parents were sort of absent at times. And so Lillian took on a lot of the almost parental role for Rosie. The younger sister name is Rosie. And so that really shaped who Lillian is. She's sort of this like hyper responsible, really wants to do well at everything she does. She wanted to have a great career. She goes to medical school. She's always sort of she's an achiever. But for Rosie, who's a 10-year younger sister, when her sister sort of grows up and leaves her, it felt like a huge abandonment to her. So this dynamic between the older sister and younger sister was really interesting. I'm an older sister, so I could relate really easily to that feeling of like responsibility towards the younger siblings. Although my parents were, thoroughly involved, and I did not have to take care of them like Lillian did. But I had a harder time understanding what that would have been like from the perspective of the younger sister being almost raised by the older sibling. And so I actually talked to a few people who grew up in that kind of situation, and read several articles about how damaging it can be for the younger sibling. We often think about how damaging the level of responsibility would be on an older child having to take care of the younger, but the younger sibling, they get very confused in terms of who they bond to. So their older sibling becomes almost like a parent to them, but when they inevitably grow up and have to move on with their lives and get a job and move away, it's deep abandonment. And so on top of the normal sort of sisterhood and challenges, they have this kind of unusual relationship between them.
And so that also allows guilt to be a driver for Lillian's need to find out what happens, because she does feel that she abandoned Rosie. Even if she didn't, she thinks Rosie thinks so. And she's not going to do that again. She keeps saying, it's my sister, it's my sister, it's my sister. And one of the things that's sometimes difficult about writing a thriller when someone's trying to investigate what happened to someone else is that you would think, why don't you just call the police? Why are you doing this yourself? And you give her such a wonderful motivation for doing that. Did that cross your mind at all?
Yes, absolutely. And that's something, there's, times when, beta readers or an editor would be like, why doesn't she go to the police here? And we really have to think it through to make it feel believable that she wouldn't go. Or there are times that she does go, or maybe she doesn't feel believed enough or supported enough by her husband or other people in order to actually go and get help from the police.
And it's interesting because when you bring up the husband, the idea of power, who has the power over someone's life, is so important in this novel as well. I mean, we can feel the husband. I mean, we're seeing it through Lillian's eyes. We can feel the husband seeming to be dismissive and patronizing, and certainly doing something that she wonders what is, and we don't know. So we fear with Lillian. Also, there's our various boyfriends of Rosie, who I'm being really careful here, who Lillian tracks down. Talk a little bit about the idea of a sister looking into the other sister's life. I mean, it's so private for them. And she's doing it for Rosie's own good, she thinks. And then complications ensue.
Yes. So I think oftentimes with siblings, we have an idea of the kind of person that they are. And Lillian has this, she feels like she knows who her sister was, and she feels like she understands why they had this big rift, but she didn't really. And as she starts to look into it, she uncovers things. But it is, it is Rosie's private life, and she is starting to discover things that would have made her sister probably embarrassed or ashamed to have found out have been discovered by her big sister. And so, yeah, it's a very unique sort of experience as she delves into that.
And it's amazing too, because when you talk about this book is so much about abuse of power, about manipulation and gaslighting and deception, and how the idea that we can get something wrong, which again is a pervasive theme of this, and how Lillian fears that she's getting something wrong. But so many people are manipulating other people in this book, but we, the reader in Imposter, we're not quite sure who is the cat and who is the mouse. Talk a little bit about what it was like to write that.
That was so much fun to write and to play with. And it was tricky. It's sometimes tricky to figure out how far to push things as a writer. And it was important to me that both Lillian and Rosie, that readers could begin to relate to them and try to understand their motivations. But you're right. People are manipulating other people. Their perceptions are not what they may think. So it was very fun to write.
And you wrote a diary for Rosie, and that is wonderful because it allows us into her head. It allows us into her head. And what was it like to write that? I mean, did you have that in the book from the beginning, or did you write that for yourself and then realize, ooh, Rosie's diary, I could put this in the book?
It was in the first draft, but it became a bigger and bigger role as the revision process went on. Because as I talked it through with my agent and my editors, we were working on it, we realized that we really wanted Rosie's perspective. Mm-hmm. That relationship between Lily and Rosie is the central relationship of the book. So we wanted to know her, and she's either unconscious or uncommunicative for much of the book. Mm-hmm. And so that was a way to get more and more into her mind and to watch her through this journey. And it's taking place in the past. It's a journal she wrote before all of this happened, and sort of leading up to what's going on now. It was really interesting and it's really fun to weave in those threads.
Well, I bet it was fun to write. I can feel that when you read it. And it's also fun for the reader because the reader realizes that they're finding out things about Rosie as Lillian is finding them out. And we hear it, we read it through Lillian's perception of it, and feel her sorrow and feel her guilt and feel her pain and feel her shock and surprise when she thinks, oh, now I understand why she didn't tell me this stuff. One of the linchpins of this book, though, is really how people's brains physically work and how fascinating that is, and how much we know and how much we don't know. Talk a little bit now about what role that plays in your life and how you balance. I mean, I would not call this a medical thriller, but we have an insight into how doctors think. We have an insight into the physiology of the brain. We get some insight into how nurses deal with patients as well. Talk a little bit about how you balanced your incredible medical knowledge with your necessity to write a page turner of a book, which you did.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was definitely a challenge. I really wanted it to be medically accurate. So all the things that happen in the book could really happen, though they haven't happened to any specific patients. It's fictional. But it was important to me that there's a lot of thrillers that sort of play with memory and, injuries to the brain, and they're fun to read. But as a physician, I just wanted to write something that could really happen. That was important to me. But the brain is incredibly fascinating, and the recovery after a traumatic brain injury is incredibly fascinating. And I wanted to show that because I vividly remember as a little medical student first taking care of people with brain injuries and watching them go through this period of recovery that was incredibly fascinating, where they're unable to communicate for a while. And there's very often a time when they are very agitated and even aggressive or inappropriate. And that can be really scary for the patient, scary for their loved ones as well. But to the medical team, that's often a sign that they're actually improving. Things are actually getting better. So to us, it's a good thing. But it was also really interesting to think about how memories are made and how our brain tries to take the experiences that we have and sort of make them into a story that makes sense to us. Because I think a lot of us think about memories from the past as like a video that we would watch. It's a video recording. It stays on the videotape in our minds, and we can take it back and replay it. But it's really not like that at all. We're creating these memories that are influenced by our emotions and our perceptions at the time. And they're really just stories that we're telling ourselves. So that was really fun to play with as well.
Have you ever met anyone with Capgras syndrome?
I have not. It is pretty rare. And so when I was researching it, I of course did like medical research, but I wanted to talk to some actual doctors who've taken care of people with it. So I just sort of reached out through my network across the country and found a few people and was able to talk to them.
And I love one of the things that you do so gorgeously, and it makes us love Lillian even more, is how she figures out, and I won't give it away, how she figures out how to deal with that. And she, your discussion about how she's trying to solve it. If she can't fix her, she'll figure out a way. If she can't cure her, she can figure out a way to deal with it. And I think that's quite brilliant. Let's talk about being in a hospital situation and the pressures of being in a hospital situation, what it's like to be a doctor and this is a book about responsibility as well, as a wife, as a mother, as a doctor. Talk a bit about responsibility and fear and guilt and why someone would put themselves in a position, how you have to be to put yourself in a position that has so much possibility for sorrow.
That is a wonderful question. And I think many of us, when, we get together as doctors and have like really frank discussions, we talk about that, how do we deal with this? And how do we sort of go through life seeing how fragile things are? And it can be really challenging. Excuse me. Let's see, I think, excuse me. As anyone who goes into healthcare, you sort of have to recognize that you learn that life is really fragile and that things can change in a moment. And being part of those experiences with patients, even when bad things happen, can be really special and almost like a sacred experience to be there with people in these very difficult times. But the sense of responsibility that you mentioned it can feel pretty heavy at times. And I'll just give you an example. I sometimes diagnose people as part of my job with ALS, which is motor neuron disease, Lou Gehrig's disease, and it's universally fatal within like 3 to 5 years. And I actually struggle. So I very much struggle when I diagnose this with a feeling of like I gave them this disease, and I really just discovered it. But me giving them the diagnosis, sometimes I have felt a strange sense of responsibility, like I have brought this into your life. I have brought this bad news into your life. And it's something that I've had to sort of wrestle with as I've realized clearly I did not give them this disease. I was just there. I was the person who diagnosed it, and I was the person who gave them the information and talked them through this. But it can be that weight of responsibility. It is something, it can be heavy to carry sometimes.
Because you named it, because before you named it, there were all kinds of possibilities, but you closed all the doors except for this one. And
Exactly.
you had to be the one to do that. I mean, that takes some heart and some bravery. So that is more than most people would choose. So, and your work with veterans, let's talk about that a little bit when it comes to heart and bravery. No one who has more than veterans. Why did you decide to focus on that in your life as well?
Oh man, I love working with veterans. They are a fantastic population of individuals to work with. And I think many people, when they think about working with veterans, think about like older veterans, like, Vietnam veterans. And I do have quite a few patients who are older, but I have a lot of young patients too. And I have female patients, all walks of life. I take care of people who are actually like Paralympic athletes. I take care of people who, pretty incredible people, and they are wonderful to take care of. It has been such a reward. I honestly did not anticipate that would be my career path initially. But a job happened to open up, and I interviewed for it and got it, and just completely fell in love. And I just love it. I love the patients. I love the people that I work with. One thing that's really nice is I get to work with a really wonderful team of healthcare professionals. And that's something that I sort of showed a little bit of in Imposter. People like physical therapists and occupational therapists and speech language pathologists and the pharmacists and the nurses. It's wonderful to work within a team like that.
And you take us into this world so beautifully. And I don't want to give this book short shrift. I do want to tell you all that this is a page turner. It is riveting and propulsive and surprising. And you will not, I promise you, you will not figure this out. What was it like to write suspense like this? I mean, this is a true skill, which you clearly have. The idea that you can keep people turning the pages as fast as they possibly can, as I did. Talk a little bit about what it was like to write that versus the other kinds of novels that you've written in a different life.
Yeah. So it's you're right. It's very different to write that kind of page turner. And I'll tell you, there were, obviously lots of drafts, and there was some earlier drafts that had sort of more information in them and sort of more backstory and more medical information and more neuroscience. And as we were going through the revision process, we really trimmed those down. And sometimes it can be a little painful to trim those things that you work so hard to really elucidate so nicely in your prose. But I really think it helped to just continue to just trim it down and give the information that the reader needs, but not give them more information than they need.
Well, you did it gorgeously and very successfully. And I had an editor once say, no one will know what you took out.
That's a good
Right.
point.
And we think, oh, this is such a good part. I love this part. I remember once I wrote this fantastic courtroom scene. My books tend to be sort of more legal than medical. I wrote this fantastic courtroom scene, this scene with conflict and great dialogue and high stakes. And it was really good. I loved it. And my editor says, this is one of the best courtroom scenes I've ever read. And it all has to go. So, and I knew it when I was writing it. I thought, oh, she's going to cut this. But I had to write it for me. Yep. And I had to write it for the story. And I had to write it to figure out what was important, what elements to take out of it that were important to do. Your life has been so fascinating. Did you write this book during the pandemic?
No, actually, it sold during the pandemic. So I wrote the first draft of this book in sort of like a furor of sort of like this desire to get it out. It was the summer of 2019, and I wrote it, the first draft, in like 7 weeks. It just like blasted out of me. And then there was this process of like more slowly revising it and getting it ready for submission and all of that. And then it sold in 2020.
Wow, that's, I love the idea that you wrote that so quickly. What was it that was so propulsive to you about it? The sisters, the motherhood,
Yeah, all of the above. There was a real urgency with this book. And sometimes it's hard to explain, but it sort of felt like if I didn't get it out fast enough, I would lose it. It would sort of take off like a speeding train and I wouldn't be able to catch up. So, I spent weekends, my sweet husband would say, I'll take the kids, you go and get a hotel room for the weekend. And I would go and I would just write like 12 hours a day, Saturday and Sunday, and then come home and just pound out words. I mean, I've really never experienced that sort of urgency in writing before. And I think it was the story, and also just this sort of desire to put on the page a lot of the things that were in my head about, like we talked about motherhood and sisterhood and the neuroscience part of it. It just felt really personal.
Well, it came out gorgeously. I mean, I was reading somewhere, and maybe Jenna or Margaret will know this, that someone said, and I want to say it's Anne Lamott, but I don't know, that sometimes the universe will offer you a story. And if you're open to sort of almost downloading it, you get this chance to do it. And then if you don't do it, somebody else will get it. And it feels to me like you were almost channeling. I mean, not that it wasn't incredibly hard work. And we're just talking about a first draft in 7 weeks. But there was some from Liz Gilbert in Big Magic.
Oh, perfect. Yep.
That you felt something, that you changed and grew as a writer during those 7 weeks. And again, you worked on it and redrafted and took stuff out and put stuff in and recreated. But this powerful idea, how did talk about that a little bit? How did that feel? I mean, there you are in the hotel room, bad TV and a bad bedspread or whatever.
Yeah, just typing on my little laptop. You know, it was just it's hard sometimes to look back and sort of remember that sort of like crazy urgency to get all those words down during that time. And I think part of it also was this sort of desire to get my words out. Because publication, there was rejections along the way that had happened. And it was sort of this feeling of like, I want this book to be the book. I want this book to be the book because this book means so much to me. I don't want this book to go in a drawer and not see the light of day.
That's so interesting. I've heard Jocelyn Jackson talk about that she wanted it to be her book to be the book. And there's a feeling that people have. And you have done that with Imposter, you all. I've forgotten to welcome you all here. I see Renee and I see Darlene and I see Brenda and so many people. Lynn is here and Andrea is here and Pamela's here and Esty Houston. Oh my golly, Sherry is here. Diane is here. Patty. Wow, we have so many people.
Wow.
Right, Brady, do go look at the comments when we're finished because there's a lot of acclamation and approval and applause and desire for this marvelous book. Let's take some questions from some of you. Who has a question for Bradeigh? I know I've seen them pop up along the way. I'll just take Renee. I see that. Are you writing another novel now, or have you already? I love that.
Yes, great question. So I'm about ready to begin edits on my second book, my second thriller that's going to be coming out next year.
Does it have a title?
Not quite. We're narrowing it down.
Not quite. Was Imposter always Imposter?
Always, from the beginning. Yep.
And at the very beginning of the show, Sherry, I think, asked, what about the cover? Well, now you know that it's about two sisters and about neuroscience. But talk a little bit about when you saw this cover. What did you think when you saw this? And was this the first cover?
No, we went through a few different options with the cover. And I asked for profiles of women, 2 women. I wanted that, but I didn't quite know. I mean, I'm not a designer, so I didn't know how I wanted to do it. And so there was a lot of different iterations and sort of getting it right. And I loved this idea of these 2 women, it's the 2 sisters, sort of backwards from each other, flipped upside down. And it's so interesting to turn them upside down because they're not the exact same person. They're different. And so it's interesting, but they look a lot alike, which these 2 sisters do. And so I loved that sort of interesting shape it makes and the ability to sort of turn it around and look at it from different angles.
I agree. And the other thing that I think is so cool about this is that essentially there's one brain. Mm-hmm. One brain there, one working brain potentially there, or that they're sharing information and trying to communicate in this sort of, I hate to say mind meld kind of way, but it is all about the brain and 2 people, 1 mind, and it works gorgeously. Who else has a question? How are you celebrating the release of Imposter? Are you doing anything special?
Yeah, well, we're going to do an event at my local indie bookstore, and I'm so excited to be there. It's called the King's English. It's here in Salt Lake City, Utah. And then we'll have a party at my house. I was just in Chicago over the weekend, and I was there for like a pre-launch party and a couple panels for some literary festivals. So that was also really fun.
Was it Printers Row? Is that what it was?
Yes.
How was
Mhm.
that?
It was wonderful.
Was
Yeah,
it,
I really loved
what
it.
was it like to be there as a thriller writer as compared to the romantic novels that you've done in the past?
It was really fun. I was actually on a panel for each of those, so I had to sort of switch hats from one to the other. But my panel where I talked about imposters, we talked about secrets, and it was the perfect topic to sort of bounce around between different authors. It was really fun discussion.
And then your other fiction, what was the other panel? And talk a little bit about your double life.
Yeah, the other panel was a sort of a romance panel focused on love and legacy. And so my other life, I co-write romantic women's fiction, and The Beach Trap was our first book, and it came out in June, and it's also about sisters who are estranged, but very different tone than Imposter. It's a beach read,
Tell about
it's
your
romance.
co-author. She's wonderful.
It's very fun.
Tell about your co-author. She's wonderful.
Oh, my co-author is Allison Hammer, and she's an author in her own right. She's an author of 2 amazing women's fiction novels. And she and I have been friends, very good friends, and critique partners. So we exchange, pages and critique each other's work. And we've been doing that for years. And then one day we just had this whim, let's just write a book together. So we did.
And I guess that worked. That is marvelous.
And it did. Yeah.
I have to tell you, there's a big swell of applause for your bookshelves.
Oh, thank you.
Tell a little bit about why did you decide to do it that way? And can you find anything?
Yes. So I'm a very visual person. And I know some people say I would never find my books that way. But for me, I know exactly what color the spine of my books are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can find them very easily when they're organized like this. I know if they're light blue or dark blue or green. And also, books make me really happy. I think they're beautiful. And so to have colors, walking into this office every day makes me very happy.
Isn't that nice? Isn't that a great feeling? I mean, who would have thought? I mean, did you ever think that you would have such, you're just at the beginning of an amazingly successful career, I'm sure, as a thriller writer, already a successful doctor, already a successful mom and wife. What do you think about that?
It's a very interesting question, because there was a long time that I spent, just working my job as a physician, which I love, and being a mother, which I love, and then feeling this sort of itch in the back of my brain to write a very long time. And I did not listen to it. And I sort of worked very hard to not listen to it. And then one day I finally just said, fine, I'll just sit down. And I just started writing a chapter. And in fact, it was a chapter about 2 women in a car accident, and one ends up with a brain injury. And there was a lot of feeling of imposter syndrome, feeling like, who am I to think that I can just start to write a book? Who am I to say that I could do that? But I said to myself, it took me 12 years in total to become a physician in my specialty, from undergraduate to medical school to residency, 12 years. And so becoming a writer is just as challenging in a different way. So it's going to take time. It's going to take time for me to learn it. And I'm going to have to work really hard at it. And sometimes I'm not going to be good at it. But I just had to sort of settle into that feeling of being okay with not being good for a while.
That is wise. That is the whole ball game. Absolutely. So I know beginning to write a book is sort of this bizarre combination of naivete and confidence together. And the idea that you think, I wouldn't try to learn French overnight, or why would I think I could write a novel overnight? And your analogy of medical school is absolutely perfect. Well, we are thrilled that you listen to your brain. We are thrilled that you listen to your brain, as we all should. Congratulations on Imposter. Shall we give away a copy?
Yes, let's do it. I'm excited.
Let's win the wheel of fun and see who wins. So many people here today. That is wonderful. Feels like we should have heartbeat music, maybe.
I know. Drum roll.
And the winner is Julie Kodama. That's great. Congratulations, Julie. And you will win, not this copy, because I'm especially since it's all battered.
Yes, you'll get a nice, fresh, new copy.
Nice, fresh, new copy. Julie, just email me. You'll get some instructions about how to do that. And we will get that to Bradeigh, and she will get you the book. Bradeigh, congratulations. Have a
Thank
you're in
you.
Salt Lake City, you said?
I am.
So your day is just sort of beginning
Yep.
with much
Mhm.
celebration to come. Well, we are all here at A Mighty Blaze celebrating you like mad. We are so happy that you, so happy with your new book and so proud of you. And I cannot wait to read your next book. I'm going to my mailbox right now to look for that. Now I'm going to tell you all who we have next week. I'm going to look at my calendar here. We have Katie Tallow with Poison Lilies, another wonderful book from a Canadian author, again about secrets. So we are so thrilled to bring you Katie Tallow's book at our regular time, 4 p.m. ET next Thursday. So we hope you will join us. Bradeigh, congratulations. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Have a wonderful day, you all. Congratulations on your launch. And you all remember, it is always safe inside a book. And we will see you next time on Crime Time.